The morning began like any other, except for the silence, the kind that presses against your chest, heavy and wrong. Mira Santos woke to sunlight spilling through the blinds, cutting pale lines across the unmade bed. Ethan's side was cold, his pillow dented, his scent, coffee and sandalwood, already fading. She called out for him once, softly, then again, louder. The apartment answered with nothing but the faint hum of the refrigerator. In the kitchen, 2 untouched mugs sat on the counter, one for him, one for her. He'd made them both, it seemed, before leaving. The coffee was still warm. Her chest tightened. Ethan was an early riser, yes, but he never left without a note, never without a kiss goodbye. She checked the children's room next. The door was ajar, the curtains dancing in the weak morning breeze. Their small beds, empty, pillows on the floor. The teddy bear her daughter clutched every night was gone. At first, she told herself he'd taken them for a drive, maybe breakfast, maybe a surprise. She waited by the window, scrolling through her phone for his message. There was none. Hours slipped by. Noon sunlight replaced the morning haze. The street outside grew busier, yet inside, the apartment felt hollow, stripped of breath. By evening, panic began to burn through her rational thoughts. She called his phone, straight to voicemail, again and again. Finally, she opened their closet and her body went cold. His clothes were gone, every shirt, every suit, even his old sneakers. The shelf where his passport lay was empty, his watch box too. That was when it hit her. He hadn't just left for the day, he had left her. Her knees buckled, but she forced herself to stand. She tore through drawers, searching for anything. An explanation, a note, a trace, bank statements, receipts. The savings account they'd built together showed a zero balance. She checked her phone again. Their last conversation flashed on the screen. Love you. Sleep early. 8 years of marriage, 2 children, a life built from struggle and compromise, and he was gone. By nightfall, the police arrived after her trembling call. The young officer's tone was cautious, sympathetic. Are you sure he didn't mention anything? Any fight recently? Mira shook her head, unable to form words. Behind her, the family photos on the wall seemed to mock her. Ethan holding their son, smiling for the camera, the perfect husband, the devoted father. Detective Ramos appeared the next morning, middle-aged, quiet eyes, the kind that had seen too many broken homes. He studied the apartment like it was a crime scene. People don't just vanish, Mrs. Santos, he said gently, especially not with 2 kids. Mira sat at the kitchen table, clutching Ethan's mug, the coffee long since gone cold. He loved them, she whispered. He wouldn't hurt them. Ramos nodded but didn't answer. His gaze fell on the family calendar on the wall. 9 days marked off since their wedding anniversary. A date circled in red below it. Flight to Cebu. Postponed. He glanced at her. Did he ever mention going back there? Mira frowned, shaking her head. Cebu was his hometown, a place he never talked about, a place that seemed buried in his past. Ramos took a slow breath. Then maybe that's where we start. When the detective left, Mira wandered through the apartment one last time. Every corner carried a ghost. Her son's laughter, her daughter's soft singing, Ethan's quiet humming while he shaved. She opened the front door and looked out at the night. A single light flickered in the hallway, casting long shadows on the floor. For the first time, she wondered if she ever truly knew the man she had married. And somewhere far from home, Ethan Reyes drove through the dark, his children asleep in the back seat, his eyes fixed on the road ahead, never once looking back. The morning after Ethan's disappearance, the world around Mira moved on as if nothing had changed. Outside, neighbors swept their porches, vendors shouted by the street corner, and tricycles rattled past the gate. But inside the apartment, time stood still, suffocating and still. Detective Ramos returned just after sunrise, the faint smell of tobacco clinging to his jacket. He placed 2 cups of coffee on the table, but Mira barely touched hers. Her eyes were rimmed red, her voice raw from repeating the same story. I told you, she said, her fingers trembling around the mug. He didn't say anything, no warning, he just disappeared. Ramos nodded patiently. People hide things, Mrs. Santos, even from those closest to them. That sentence hung in the air like a knife. Mira flinched. Not Ethan. He wasn't perfect, but he wasn't capable of this. The detective didn't argue. Instead, he opened a small notebook and began jotting down details, dates, habits, numbers. Tell me about the last few months. Anything unusual? Anything at all? At first, Mira struggled to think, but as silence filled the room, memories began to surface, one by one. Ethan's late-night calls in the bathroom, the way he'd changed his phone password, the business trips that lasted longer than he'd claimed. She remembered the night he came home smelling of someone else's perfume, faint but unmistakable. She'd asked, and he laughed, kissed her forehead, and said, "Stop overthinking, it's just work." But it wasn't just work. Her voice broke as she spoke, each recollection peeling away the illusion she'd built over years. Ramos listened quietly, his pen scratching across the page. "Did he ever mention money problems?" he asked finally. "Once," she whispered. "He said a friend needed help with an investment. I told him to stay out of it. He got angry, really angry. It wasn't like him." Ramos answered up, meeting her eyes. "Do you remember the friend's name?" She hesitated. Marco Tan. They met at a company dinner years ago. The detective wrote it down, his expression tightening. "We'll look into him." Mira looked toward the children's room. The air there still smelled faintly of baby powder and crumpled blankets. "He loved our kids," she murmured. "Whatever he's done, he wouldn't hurt them." Ramos didn't respond immediately. He stood and walked to the window, scanning the street below. "Sometimes love makes people do strange things," he said softly, "even the unforgivable." When he left, the apartment felt emptier than before. Mira moved through the rooms, her mind replaying the detective's words. People hide things. She found herself opening Ethan's drawer again, searching for something she'd missed. This time, she noticed a folded receipt tucked behind an old photograph. 2 adults, 2 children, smiling at a resort that wasn't theirs. The logo on the paper read, Cebu Ocean View Hotel. Her pulse quickened. The date, 2 weeks before he vanished. Her shaking fingers dialed the number on the receipt. A woman's voice answered, cheerful and unaware. "Good afternoon, Ocean View Hotel, Cebu." Mira could barely speak. "Hi, I just need to ask, was there a guest named Ethan Reyes staying there recently?" The woman paused. "Let me check. Yes, ma'am, but not under that name. He was registered as Daniel Cruz." The line went silent. Mira's breath caught. In that instant, she knew Ethan wasn't missing. He was hiding, and for the first time, she wasn't sure she wanted to find him. Sleep became a luxury Mira could no longer afford. Every hour of silence gnawed at her. Every unanswered call felt like a taunt. The name Daniel Cruz echoed in her head like a curse. Ethan had lived a life beneath her nose, and she'd never seen it. Detective Ramos returned 2 days later, carrying a thin file. He looked more tired than before. "We traced the bank withdrawals," he said, placing the papers on the table. "All cash, no digital footprint. But there's something else. Transfers to a woman named Lena Cruz." Mira's brow furrowed. "Cruz? The same surname he used at the hotel?" Ramos nodded. Possibly not a coincidence. He opened the file. Photos spilled across the table. Blurred shots of a woman with long hair laughing beside Ethan at a cafe. Different city, different life. His arm draped around her shoulders with the same easy affection he once gave Mira. Her throat tightened. "That's her?" "Yes. We believe she's been in contact with him for over a year. Neighbors thought they were married." The words didn't seem real. Her hands trembled as she touched the photo, tracing the outline of the man she thought she knew. The same smile, the same charm, but his eyes were colder. Ramos spoke carefully. "We're pulling records from Cebu. The hotel confirmed the alias. He stayed there several times with his wife and 2 kids. Mira's voice cracked. 2 kids? The detective hesitated. "Not yours. Another set." Her world tilted, the room blurred at the edges. Ethan hadn't just lied. He'd duplicated his life, like a shadow splitting in 2. Mira pushed the photos away and turned toward the window, trying to breathe. When Ramos left, she sat in silence for hours, staring at the faint reflection of herself in the glass, a woman half alive, half haunted. Eventually, she opened her laptop, searching for Lena Cruz. Social media made the hunt easy. He was, smiling beside Ethan in picture after picture. His name was Daniel. Their captions read like a cruel parody of Mira's own life. She scrolled through the images, her fingers shaking. Birthdays, family dinners, beach vacations. Their kids looked the same age as hers. In one post, Lena tagged the location, Cebu Ocean View Resort. Her stomach turned. Mira took screenshots, printed them, and pinned them on the wall beside the police reports. The room began to resemble an evidence board, lines connecting faces, places, and lies. She didn't recognize the woman she was becoming, but it didn't matter. Grief had evolved into something sharper. That night, the power flickered during a thunderstorm. As the lights dimmed, her phone buzzed with an unknown number. Heart pounding, she answered. A woman's voice, hesitant, trembling. "Is this Mira Santos?" "Yes. Who is this?" "This is Lena. I don't know you, but I think we're both married to the same man." For a moment, the room disappeared. The storm outside faded. Only the sound of Lena's ragged breathing filled the line. "He told me his name was Daniel," Lena whispered. "But last night, he found out I was looking through his things. He got violent. He took his car and left. I think he knows someone's after him." Mira's mind raced. "Did he say where he was going?" "No," Lena said, voice breaking, "but he mentioned the kids. Said he needed to fix things before they grow up." The line went dead. Mira stood frozen, phone still pressed to her ear. Rain lashed against the window. Outside, lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating her reflection. A woman on the edge of discovery and danger. She didn't know it yet, but this call had just opened the door to the darkest truth she would ever face. And the next time she saw Ethan, blood would already be on his hands. The storm didn't stop until dawn, but Mira didn't sleep. She sat by the window all night, phone in hand, replaying Lena's voice over and over. Each word felt like a blade carving deeper into her chest. "We're both married to the same man." By morning, she'd made her choice. Waiting for the police wasn't enough anymore. She needed answers, and she would find them herself. Her first message to Lena was cautious, almost formal. "I believe you. I just want to talk." Hours passed before a reply came. "Meet me at the cafe on Lapu-Lapu Street, noon. Please come alone." Mira stared at the screen, heart hammering. Alone. That word carried weight, but fear had long been replaced by something stronger, the need for truth. The cafe was small and unremarkable, tucked between a pawn shop and a pharmacy. The smell of burnt espresso and wet pavement clung to the air. Mira sat at a corner table, palms sweating, eyes fixed on the door. Every passing minute stretched endlessly. Then Lena walked in. She was younger, early 30s, soft-featured, with tired eyes that hinted at sleepless nights. For a moment, both women just stared at each other, realizing that the stranger standing before them had lived the same lie. "You're Mira," Lena said quietly, sliding into the chair opposite her. Mira nodded. "And you're the woman he became someone else for." The bitterness in her voice made Lena flinch. "I didn't know," she said quickly. "He told me his wife died years ago. He showed me photos of you, but said you were gone." Mira's stomach twisted. "He used my pictures?" Lena nodded, tears forming. "He said he couldn't move on, that he'd been widowed young. I pitied him. Her voice broke. "I loved him." They sat in silence, the weight of betrayal pressing down like a storm cloud. Outside, a bus rumbled past, scattering puddles across the street. "How long?" Mira finally asked. "Most 3 years," Lena whispered. "We have a daughter together. He's been splitting his time between us. Trips, business meetings, fake emergencies. I didn't question it until I found a photo in his wallet. 2 kids I didn't recognize." "My children," Mira said, her voice hollow. Lena covered her mouth, realizing the full horror of it. They exchanged stories then, their timelines overlapping like puzzle pieces, forming a grotesque picture. Ethan, or Daniel, had crafted parallel lives, perfectly synchronized. Birthdays, anniversaries, even excuses for absences matched. He wasn't just lying, he was orchestrating. Lena reached into her bag and handed Mira a small envelope. "He left this in his drawer before he disappeared. Maybe it means something." Inside was a printed flight itinerary. A one-way ticket to Davao, booked under Daniel Cruz. The departure date, 3 days after he vanished with the kids. Mira's breath caught. He's running again. Lena's hand shook as she touched hers. Please, if you find him, promise me you'll protect our daughter. He said things before he left. Dark things. What kind of things? He said he couldn't live with 2 families anymore, that he needed to end it cleanly. I thought he meant leaving, but now... The words trailed off, but the meaning was clear. Mira stood, her chair scraping the floor. I'm not going to let him hurt anyone else. Lena looked up, frightened yet relieved. Be careful. He's not the same man anymore. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the streets glistening under a gray sky. Mira clutched the itinerary tightly as she walked toward the waiting taxi. Every step felt heavier, her heart pounding with fury and fear. In her mind, she replayed Ethan's smile. The warmth in his eyes that once felt safe, now she saw the truth behind it. Manipulation, control, a quiet madness brewing beneath the surface. She didn't know yet that this meeting had set something in motion that couldn't be undone, because by the time she reached Davao, the first body would already be found. The sun was sinking when Mira's plane touched down in Davao. The air smelled of rain and salt, heavy with the promise of something terrible. She clutched the printed itinerary in one hand, her pulse hammering with every step. The closer she got, the more she feared what she might find. Detective Ramos had tried to stop her. He called twice before takeoff, his voice tight. Let us handle this, Mira. You're walking into danger. But she couldn't wait. Not anymore. Waiting had already cost her a family. The small coastal town was quiet, almost eerily so. She found a cheap hotel near the bus terminal and called Ramos again. This time, she gave him the address on the itinerary. If I'm right, she said, he's still here. 2 hours later, her phone buzzed. It was Ramos. His tone was grim. We found something. Mira's heart stuttered. What do you mean? There was a report from local police. An abandoned car near a rice field outside the city. The plates match your husband's. Her knees went weak. Was anyone inside? A long pause. No, but there's blood, Mira. A lot of it. The words echoed in her head long after the call ended. She sat on the edge of the bed, staring at her shaking hands. Ethan's car. Blood. No bodies. Her thoughts raced through possibilities. Had he hurt the children? Had someone taken them from him? She couldn't breathe. The next morning, she met Ramos at the crime scene. The car was half hidden by tall grass, streaked with mud and rust. Inside, the passenger seat was smeared with dried blood. A child's toy lay on the floor, her son's plastic dinosaur. Ramos stood beside her. Forensics says the blood type matches both adult and child samples. We're waiting for confirmation. Mira gripped the car door, the world spinning. He's done something, hasn't he? Ramos didn't answer, but his silence spoke louder than any words. They searched a nearby area for hours, calling Ethan's name, but only the wind answered. Finally, one of the officers approached, holding out a torn photograph. It was a family picture. Ethan, Lena, and their daughter, ripped clean through the middle. Mira stared at the torn edge where Ethan's face had been. He destroyed everything, she whispered. That night, back in the hotel, she couldn't sleep. Every creak in the walls felt like footsteps. Every shadow seemed to breathe. She turned on her phone, scrolling through Ethan's old messages. The sweet nothings, the promises, the apologies that now sounded hollow. At midnight, her phone buzzed again. A message, unknown number. Stop looking for me. Her chest tightened. She typed back instantly. Where are the kids? No reply. Then another message appeared. You wouldn't understand. I had to do it. Mira's blood ran cold. Do what? She typed. But before she could hit send, the number went dead. She sat there, staring at the screen until dawn. By morning, she'd made up her mind. She would follow the trail until it ended, no matter where it led. Ramos arrived just as she was leaving. He looked worn down, his eyes shadowed. The lab confirmed it, he said quietly. The blood in the car, it's Ethan's and Lena's. Mira froze. Lena, he nodded. She's dead, likely killed 2 nights ago. Her stomach twisted. And my children? No sign of them, Ramos said. But we found something near the coast, a property recently purchased under Daniel Cruz. a house by the lake. The world tilted again. Mira's grief hardened into resolve. "Then that's where he's hiding," she said. "And that's where I'll find him." Outside, the sky cracked open with thunder. The storm was coming again. But this time, it wasn't just weather. It was the reckoning she'd been waiting for. And somewhere near that quiet lake, Ethan Reyes was preparing for his final act. The drive to the lake felt endless, a stretch of gray roads coiling through forgotten farmland and ghostly woods. Mira sat in the back of the patrol car, watching the world blur past the rain-streaked window. Detective Ramos drove in silence, his hands steady on the wheel, his jaw set with the tension of a man expecting the worst. Neither spoke. Words would have been useless now. The radio crackled occasionally with updates from the forensics team, but none of them mattered. There was only one place left for this to end. When they reached the property, the sky had turned the color of lead. The lake sprawled ahead, its surface calm and deceptive, reflecting the dead trees lining its banks. The house stood alone at the edge, small and low-roofed, its windows shuttered and the porch sagging under years of neglect. It didn't look like a home. It looked like a hiding place. Ramos signaled to the two officers trailing behind them, and they fanned out silently. Mira followed close, her heart beating a hollow rhythm in her chest. Every step toward the house felt heavier, every breath sharper. There was a smell in the air, damp wood, stagnant water, and something else beneath it, faint but unmistakable. Decay. The front door was locked, but the key lay under a broken flower pot, as if deliberately placed there. Ramos hesitated before turning the knob, glancing at Mira. She nodded once. The door creaked open. The first thing they saw was the clutter. Photographs scattered across the floor, ripped and half-burned, fragments of two lives merging into one nightmare. On the wall, children's drawings hung crookedly, each with names written in childish scrawl. Mira's son, Lena's daughter, both smiling, both innocent. A sound echoed from deeper inside, a faint rhythmic tapping, like water dripping into a basin. Ramos motioned for the officers to cover the back and moved forward. Mira followed despite his warning gesture. The air grew colder as they entered the living room. The curtains were drawn, the only light seeping from a crack in the ceiling. On the table lay a diary, open to the last page. Mira recognized Ethan's handwriting instantly. The words were frantic, slanted, uneven. They wouldn't stop crying. They kept asking for each other. I couldn't make them understand. I needed silence. Mira's throat closed. She clutched the edge of the table to steady herself. Ramos signaled for one officer to check the basement. Moments later, a shout echoed through the house. They ran down the narrow stairs, the air thick with damp and rot. The basement was small, concrete walls slick with moisture. In the far corner sat a wooden chest, its lid slightly ajar. Inside were children's clothes, neatly folded, and two small shoes resting on top. No bodies, no blood, just the ghostly traces of absence. Then Mira noticed the water. A thin trail led from the chest to a hatch in the floor, the edges wet. She knelt, touching it. Cold, slick, lake water. "He used the lake," she whispered, horror rising in her voice. Ramos's expression hardened. "We'll call in divers." They sealed off the property, but Mira refused to leave. She stood at the edge of the lake as night fell, the wind tearing at her coat, the reflection of the moon trembling on the water's surface. Somewhere beneath that silver skin lay the truth, the one she'd chased through lies, love, and madness. As the divers prepared their equipment, she thought she saw movement under the surface, a faint ripple, as if something had stirred. Her breath caught, her pulse faltering. Behind her, Ramos spoke softly. "When the water gives up its secrets, be ready. It might not be what you expect." She didn't answer. The lake stretched before her like an open grave, vast and silent. And as the first diver slipped beneath the surface, the storm began again. The lake had swallowed the dawn. By the time the diver surfaced, the world had turned gray and heavy, the water slick like oil beneath the morning sky. Mira stood motionless, her eyes fixed on the rippling surface. The diver's movements were methodical, their gestures quiet, deliberate, the kind used when truth was too fragile to touch. When the first body bag rose from the water, she didn't scream. She just closed her eyes. The divers found 2 more before noon, one small, one smaller. It was all too neat, too orchestrated, like a final act of control. Ramos stayed by her side, saying nothing. His silence was its own kind of mercy. The crime scene technicians moved with grim efficiency, marking the soil, photographing the shoreline, scraping mud into small plastic bags labeled evidence. Later, when they opened the chest again under proper light, something else was found. Beneath the clothes, tucked between the folds of a faded baby blanket, was a flash drive sealed in plastic. Ramos handed it to the forensic techs without a word, but Mira knew before anyone said it aloud. Ethan had left something behind. Not a confession, a narrative, his version of the truth. By evening, they were back at the station, the flash drive loaded into an evidence computer. The screen flickered to life, showing a video, shaky, dim, the lens pointed toward Ethan's face. He looked exhausted, his eyes hollow, his expression a ghost of the man Mira once loved. His voice came low, unsteady. He spoke of guilt, of betrayal, of how everything had begun years before. How the affair with Lena had been more than passion. It was obsession. How Mira's growing suspicion had threatened the balance he built between 2 lives. He spoke of fear, of wanting freedom, and of the night he took the children away, convinced he could start over. Mira's hands trembled, but she kept watching. Ethan's word is spilled out like poison disguised as poetry. He said he hadn't meant to hurt anyone, only to find peace. But when the children woke and began crying for their mother, something in him cracked. His voice faltered. Then the recording ended abruptly, the last frame frozen on his face, eyes wide, as if he'd finally seen himself clearly. Ramos shut off the screen. The room fell into silence. Evidence was evidence, but there was still no closure. The divers had found more. Concrete blocks tied with rope, fragments of a ladder, a metal box buried in the mud near the pier. Inside that box were documents, bank statements, fake passports, and a single letter addressed to Mira. The letter was short, written in Ethan's unmistakable hand. It read, "You weren't supposed to follow me here. You were supposed to let the past drown. Now we all have to live beneath it." She didn't cry. There were no tears left for him, only the unbearable stillness that comes when grief hardens into comprehension. She folded the letter carefully and handed it to Ramos for evidence. Then she turned toward the window, watching the rain smear the glass into silver streaks. Outside, the lake waited, vast and patient, as if daring her to come back. It still held things she hadn't seen, memories she hadn't touched. The divers would return in the morning to dredge deeper near the dock. Mira would be there, she decided, not as the grieving wife anymore, but as the final witness. When she finally left the station that night, the air was cold and sharp. The moon hovered over the lake like a single, unblinking eye. She knew what tomorrow would bring. Not answers, but confrontation. Someone else knew more. Someone had helped Ethan, and whoever they were still out there. Morning broke pale and cold over the lake, its surface glazed with mist like a sheet of breath held too long. The divers had returned at first light, their wetsuits glinting darkly under the weak sun. Mira stood with her arms wrapped around herself, watching the water ripple as they disappeared beneath. 9 days. That was how long Ethan and the children had been missing before anyone realized something was wrong. 9 days between a husband's promise and a wife's nightmare. Those days had always been a void in Mira's mind, blank, unreachable. But now, as the search continued, fragments began to rise like silt disturbed from the lake bed. The detectives reconstructed the timeline again and again. Ethan had told his co-workers he was taking a family trip. The hotel bookings, the gas receipts, the fabricated text messages, everything carefully planned to create the illusion of a happy disappearance. He wanted the world to believe they'd simply gone away. But evidence said otherwise. Tire tracks near the pier showed his car had returned late at night, alone. Mira walked the perimeter of the property, her boots sinking into the mud. The house by the lake looked smaller in daylight, almost fragile. She found herself staring at the back porch where a rusted swing hung motionless. In the corner of her vision, she could almost see the children playing, their laughter echoing faintly against the trees. But memory lied as easily as Ethan did. She blinked and the vision vanished. Ramos approached with a folder under his arm, his expression unreadable. The forensics team had matched Ethan's fingerprints to the rope found underwater and his DNA on fragments of the concrete blocks. It was proof, but not understanding. Why 9 days? Why that deliberate stretch of silence between the act and the discovery? Inside the house, technicians dusted for prints while another office photographed the walls. In the kitchen, Mira noticed the calendar still pinned beside the refrigerator. The last date circled was the 9th day, a red loop drawn in thick marker around the words, "New Start." Her breath caught. It wasn't just a countdown, it was a ritual. The flash drive, the diary, the letter, all spoke of Ethan's fractured logic, but now the pattern made sense. He hadn't run away impulsively. He had orchestrated a cleansing. 9 days to erase the life he'd built, to replace truth with fantasy. Each day, a step closer to the end he believed would set him free. Mira followed Ramos outside again, where the divers were surfacing. One of them raised a hand, signaling they'd found something new. A rusted toolbox embedded in the lake bed, wrapped in cloth. Inside were photographs, water-damaged but visible. Ethan, Lena, and the children together, smiling, playing. The dates on the backs told another story, all taken during the 9 missing days. He had documented his descent like a man chronicling a pilgrimage. Mira stared at the images, her pulse steady but hollow. They weren't memories anymore. They were evidence of a mind unraveling. The photographs felt wrong, too composed, too peaceful, as if Ethan had known they'd be found. Each smile was a message, every frame a confession disguised as nostalgia. As the sun began to fade, Mira realized something chilling. In every photograph, a faint reflection shimmered on the lake's surface, a shadowy outline standing behind them. It wasn't Ethan. It was someone else, someone who had been there. Her heart thudded. The possibility she had pushed aside since the beginning rose again. Ethan hadn't acted alone. There was another hand guiding this madness, another voice in the dark. Ramos caught her expression. "What is it?" he asked quietly. Mira didn't answer. Her eyes stayed fixed on the photo, tracking that faint silhouette. Because now, she finally understood what the next step would demand. Not justice, but truth. And the truth was waiting to speak. Night returned to the lake like a memory refusing to fade. The mist had thickened, curling between the trees, turning the air heavy and cold. Mira stood near the porch light, staring at the photo again. The one with the faint silhouette reflected on the water. The longer she looked, the clearer it became. That figure wasn't a trick of light. It was a person standing behind Ethan, watching, and she knew who it was. Lena. The name felt poisonous on her tongue. The mistress who had vanished after the police began investigating. The woman who had claimed ignorance when questioned. Mira had believed her lies once. The trembling voice, the tears, the insistence that Ethan manipulated her too. But now the evidence whispered a different truth. Lena had been there. She had seen everything. Maybe she had helped. Detective Ramos wasn't convinced until the forensic team recovered tire prints matching Lena's car near the dock. That was the proof he needed. A warrant was issued, and by dusk the hunt began. Mira insisted on coming along. She said she needed to look Lena in the eyes. Ramos hesitated, but agreed. Something in his gut told him this story wouldn't end without both women in the same room. They found her 3 towns over, in a small roadside motel, registered under a false name. When the officers knocked, Lena didn't resist. She opened the door slowly, eyes swollen, hair unkempt, as though she'd been expecting them all along. Mira stood behind Ramos, her face pale but unreadable. Inside, the air smelled of cigarettes and rain. A single suitcase sat by the bed, half-packed. On the nightstand lay an envelope addressed to Mira. Lena's hands trembled as she gestured toward it. "He told me you'd come," she whispered. Mira stepped forward, voice steady but cold. "You were with him. You watched him drown them." Lena's eyes filled with tears, her voice breaking. "I tried to stop him. I swear I did. He said it was mercy, that they'd be safe with him. He said—" "Stop lying," Mira cut in, her composure cracking. "You helped him. You stood by while he killed our children." Ramos intervened, motioning for calm, but the truth had already ignited between them. Lena's defenses collapsed. Her words spilled out in fragments. How Ethan had spiraled in the days before, obsessed with cleansing his soul. How he'd begged her to stay, to witness his rebirth. She claimed she hadn't known he'd harmed the children until it was too late. By then, she said, he'd dragged her into his madness, forcing her to help hide the bodies, to drive him back to the lake where he would later drown himself. But something in her story didn't fit. When Ramos pressed her on the timeline, she faltered. Her eyes darted toward the envelope again. Mira took it, tore it open, and read the letter inside. Ethan's final words, written in the same jagged handwriting as the flash drive entries. She wanted them gone too. She said it was the only way we could be together, but she didn't stay. She left me there to finish it alone. Mira's hands trembled as she lowered the page. Lena froze. The room went silent except for the faint hum of the flickering motel light. Ramos stepped closer, his expression grim. "We'll verify it, but this changes everything." Lena collapsed onto the bed, sobbing, her face buried in her hands. "I didn't mean for any of it. I loved him. I just wanted him to choose me." Mira turned away, numb. The truth was too tangled to offer comfort. Love twisted into complicity, grief warped into guilt. As Ramos led Lena out in handcuffs, Mira remained still, staring at the empty doorway. The storm outside had returned, thunder rolling low across the lake in the distance. She knew this wasn't the end. Ethan's voice still lingered in every corner of her mind, and soon it would demand to be heard one last time. The rain did not stop that night. It fell in relentless sheets, washing the motel's neon glow into the puddles outside. Mira sat alone in the interrogation room hours later, her reflection fractured across the glass wall. She had refused to go home, refused rest, food, or comfort. Ramos had urged her to leave, but she couldn't. The truth was unfinished, and she would not look away until it was complete. Across the hall, Lena sat under harsh white light. Her mascara had bled into thin black lines, her eyes hollow from exhaustion. She had confessed to helping Ethan after the murders, moving the bodies, cleaning the house, erasing evidence. But every sentence came wrapped in self-pity, every admission shadowed by excuses. She spoke of love as if it were an illness she couldn't cure. Mira listened through the glass, her expression empty. Love had been the seed of all this, and now it had rotted into the soil of their lives. The evidence was clear. Lena was an accomplice, but the timeline she provided exposed something darker, that Ethan had not drowned himself immediately after the killings. He had stayed alive for 2 days, hiding near the lake, writing letters, recording confessions, waiting for someone who never came. Mira's stomach turned at the thought. She imagined him pacing in the dark, whispering to ghosts, waiting for redemption that never arrived. When the transcripts were finally read aloud, Ramos's voice grew heavy. In one of Ethan's letters, he admitted he had once planned to frame Mira. He had forged documents, hidden photographs, even scripted text messages to make her look guilty if the police investigated. "She built the cage," he wrote. "I just learned how to live inside it." Mira felt a sharp pain in her chest. The familiar ache of betrayal that no longer burned, only weighed. But the worst came from Lena's statement. She revealed that Ethan's obsession with purity wasn't only madness, it was rooted in guilt. Years earlier, during one of his business trips, there had been an accident, a child, a hit and run. It had never been reported, never discovered. That was when his unraveling began, when he convinced himself the universe demanded payment. Every lie since then, every secret, had been his way of bargaining with guilt. Mira sat in silence after hearing it all. The room spun slowly, her thoughts collapsing inward. For 8 years she had lived beside a man carrying a corpse in his conscience. Every smile, every touch had been a disguise. She wondered if she had ever truly known him, or if she had simply loved the version of him he needed her to see. When Ramos entered, he placed the final file on the table. "This closes it," he said quietly. "We'll charge Lena in the morning." Mira nodded but didn't look up. Closure was a word invented by people who hadn't lived through nightmares. There was no closing this, only enduring it. As the night deepened, the storm began to fade, replaced by a silence so thick it felt alive. Mira rose, walking toward the window overlooking the darkened parking lot. The rain had stopped, but the world still seemed drenched. Her reflection looked older, unfamiliar. Somewhere between truth and grief, she had become someone else entirely. She turned back to Ramos. "You said he recorded everything," she murmured. "All of it?" He hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, there's one last file they're decrypting. It might be his final message." Mira's breath stilled. Somewhere in the forensics lab, her dead husband's voice was waiting to speak one more time. And for the first time in months, she wasn't sure she wanted to hear it. The following morning broke pale and hollow, as though the sun itself hesitated to rise. The police station was quiet, stripped of its usual rhythm. The case files were sealed, the suspects processed, and yet there was no sense of completion, only an echo that lingered in every corridor. Mira sat in the evidence room, a mug of untouched coffee beside her, the faint hum of the computer filling the air. On the screen, a single decrypted file blinked. Ethan Final, MP4. Her pulse quickened. Ramos had offered to stay, but she asked him to leave. This was hers to face. With a trembling breath, she clicked play. The video began in near darkness, lit only by the flicker of a dying candle. Ethan sat before the camera, drenched in shadow. His face looked thinner, his eyes sunken, the edges of madness carved deep into every line. The sound of water lapped softly in the background. The lake, Mira realized. He was there when he recorded this. His voice, when it came, was calm, too calm. He spoke of ghosts that refused to rest, of nights filled with whispers that weren't entirely his own. He said the children came to him in dreams, standing at the water's edge, their hands reaching out. He said they never blamed him, only asked why he brought them home too soon. Mira's stomach twisted, the words coiling like venom. He admitted to everything, the affair, the planning, the lies. But he also spoke of someone else, not Lena, not Mira, but a third presence. "There was always another voice," he murmured. "The one that told me what must be done. I thought it was God. Now I know it wasn't." The video flickered. For a brief second, a shape moved behind him, a reflection in the lake's surface, a woman's silhouette. The same outline Mira had seen in the photographs. But this time, it wasn't Lena. The posture, the height, even the tilt of the head. It was Mira herself. Her heart stopped. PPD. She rewound the footage, stared harder, but the reflection blurred as the water rippled. Was it coincidence, or was Ethan taunting her from beyond? She could no longer tell where reality ended and guilt began. Then came his final words. "If you're watching this, it means they found me. Maybe you think you've won, Mira, but this story doesn't end with death. It ends when you understand that I was never alone in the dark." The camera tilted, showing the lake, vast, black, and infinite. Then the screen went black. Mira sat frozen, her reflection mirrored faintly in the blank monitor. She tried to breathe, but the air felt thick, heavy with something unseen. The idea clawed at her mind. What if Ethan's madness had touched her too? What if the guilt she carried had become its own haunting? Footsteps echoed behind her. Ramos entered quietly, holding a folder. "The autopsy reports are in," he said. "You should see this." Inside were photographs of Ethan's body, retrieved from the lake. Mira forced herself to look. The pale skin, the rope burns, the waterlogged eyes. But what struck her most wasn't him. It was what they found clenched in his hand, a small charm bracelet belonging to their daughter. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "He took it with him." Ramos nodded slowly. "Maybe he couldn't let go. Maybe none of us can." She closed the folder, her fingers trembling. The lake had given up its secrets, but its echoes still lived inside her. Every reflection, every drop of rain seemed to carry his voice now. As she walked out into the gray morning, the wind rippled across the water. For a moment, she thought she heard laughter, soft, distant, and familiar, the laughter of her children. But when she turned, the lake was still.